Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 4, Episode 28. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest this episode joins us from the nation's capital, my hometown, Dr. Ian Lee, Associate Professor at Carleton University, Sprott School, where he teaches the MBA Strategic Management capstone course. Amongst others, we have a lively and fast-paced conversation around the nature of competition, the prospects for the code of conduct, the economic prospects for Canada. Sylvain, I think you've been in the same room with Professor Lee, but have really not had the chance to talk together. So this is a big first for the people, right?
Absolutely. He's a true professor, a true legend. He's just an amazing communicator. Students love him. And let's face it. I mean, media will go to him for some advice. He doesn't do any research, but he just articulates things so well. And obviously, he had some opinions about the food industry, and I just wanted to give him a platform. And so I'm glad that he accepted our invitation.
Yeah, I mean, the only advice I'd give him, the advice sometimes we get when you go on TV is be yourself plus 10%. If we could have got him a little more enthusiastic about the topics, that would have been a better interview.
Did we actually ask a question? I don't think we asked a question.
We tried to ask questions and kind of sandwich them in, but it was really fun and very insightful.
When you send me the script to tell me who's asking what, I'm going, why bother? It's Ian Lee, man.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a pile of fun and great conversation. And lots of insight. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, you sound a bit different, and to me, you look a bit different. We're on camera. You're in the airport in Montreal. What brings you to the fine city of Montreal today?
Yeah, well, I flew in this morning. I'm flying back tonight. It was just in and out. I met a couple of companies, met a good friend who knows his business. He knows the food business for breakfast. And in the afternoon, actually, I met with the dairy processors of Quebec about UNESCO and, you guessed it, poutine and cheese curds. So basically, we just we're in the final phase of completing our dossier for UNESCO. So obviously, some politics are involved, and so we have to deal with Ottawa and Quebec, and so lots of great strategizing going on in the room with the board of this particular association. And that association is called Conseil des industriels du lait du Québec. They represent their processors in Quebec, and they're just awesome. They represent all cheesemakers of the province, and they really care about their art.
And in case the listeners aren't tracking, what you're doing there is working to get poutine designated by UNESCO as a, what's the official designation?
As a immaterial heritage for humanity, basically. And the challenge, of course, is that Canada has never ratified the accord at UNESCO for immaterial heritage, I guess, dishes, food, like, for example, pizza, the French baguette, camembert, Chinese tea, the hamburger from Hamburg. All of these dishes have actually been recognized by UNESCO, but not one dish from Canada yet.
So I was at the Restaurants Canada show and wandered around.
How was it?
It was good. I ran into our friends from Circana, Vince, just actually in the media room.
He knows his stuff.
Yeah, usually he said, he wanted to say hello to you, so that's what I'm doing here. Usual cast of characters on the show floor. Lots of robots, actually, like 10 displays of robots. Lots of payment type people.
So the number of you felt that the automation theme has grown over the last couple
very
years?
much so. Yeah, very much so. If you're judging by what's on that floor, they had one of those giant French fry making machines. It wasn't really working, which is kind of I don't know where they get these things sometimes, but it wasn't not very exciting to watch. I saw one working in New York at the NRF show. That was no joke. That was made by guys who make robots for Tesla. So this one was not really working, so it wasn't very impressive. Just a bunch of metal. Yeah. And lots of different stuff. I mean, and the buzz was good. The Ontario Premier made some announcements about funding, so that was good for the industry. But I was listening to some of the education stuff, and times there's a real interesting in one case, they were saying, listen, times are tough. Like people aren't eating out as much. And then other people are saying these have never been better times, that people are eating out and coming out and getting together for community. I had the opportunity to do an event at Henderson Brewery in Toronto, very community-based, great micro craft brewer. And he's pivoted. We're going to get him on the pod, the co-founder. He's pivoted because he said, I got in the craft beer business, but that's not a good business anymore. So he makes a few of his craft beers, outsourced the rest, and then turned his beer place into an event space and is thriving because the community comes there. Yeah. So, talk about nimble and moving. So anyway, restaurant operators are always nimble and always looking for new things. So we wish them nothing but the best of luck. Anyway,
that's great. Yeah, no, I actually, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're reading the market right. It really depends who you are, how you're managing your business. Of course, there's a huge difference between fast food, casual dining, and fine dining. And obviously, I think fine dining is, you got to know your market. You got to adapt if you're in fine dining. Fast food, really, this is the perfect market for them. They're doing very well. If you look at RBI's financials,
chains are doing very well, right?
Chains are doing very well, not independents.
The indies are struggling because and they got to manage their food costs. They got, the big guys got scale to help manage those food costs.
And that's my biggest concern. Are we going to actually only have chains after we're done with this? I mean, that's really my biggest concern. And I have nothing against the Tim Hortons and the McDonald's of the world. I mean, they have something to offer, but you need variety too. Yeah.
Well, I think the simple answer is there's too many. The reality is there's too many restaurants for the number of people. It's always been the case because there's so many restaurants, nobody makes a lot of money. They all cry the blues that it's a low margin, right? First words out of the mouth, it's a low margin business. Well, there's a way to fix that, but it's not fun. And that is
exactly
less restaurants. So, but I don't wish anybody, I wish everybody the best, but we'll see how it all sorts out. Let's get into the news. We start with some economic news that has an impact on consumers, an impact on the nation. The U.S. CPI numbers came out, and tell me what you thought of them. And they came out a little hotter than I think was expected. We in Canada...
You weren't expecting hot? I was expecting hot.
I don't know. What was it, 3.4%?
3.5 total. Like the general inflation landed at 3.5, food inflation 2.2, which means clearly that food no longer drives inflation. But at 3.5, man, oh boy, the dollar was hammered, and I was expecting that. But I mean, look at the data. If you look at what's going on in the U.S., that economy is boiling. Mm-hmm. It is boiling, and I wasn't surprised that the Bank of Canada basically decided to hold today. And frankly, I was like 4 weeks ago, I was in Toronto on stage after a Scotiabank economist. The Scotiabank economist said to the group that rates would go down in April and would go down in June. And I went on stage and I said, I don't know. And it's all about the U.S. It's because of the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is boiling. Like, you got to be careful. You got to pay attention to what's going on down south. Our little Tiffy friend, I think, made the right decision today. And my expectation is that the Fed may actually, the chances to see the Fed increase its rate next call has gone up. I don't know about you, but I think it's gone up.
You think they're going to increase? I think they're going to hold, but I think the expectation was they were going to start bringing it down. But I expect them now to hold.
Oh yes, no. I actually thought my expectation was that the Fed will hold.
Yes.
Now I'm thinking maybe there's a chance that we could see an increase. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I tell you.
Too close to the election. I don't think they do it. I don't think they do it. But anyway. There's that thing happening in the U.S., right? I think that's a material influencer on what and how to govern that growth. We'll leave that for there. I guess we'll just kind of keep an eye on it and what it means for the Canadian dollar. Let's talk about Stats Canada's food basket. You wrote an article. You talked about it on our last episode. It's not the first time we've talked about data from Stats Canada, but you found some real anomalies that make us think, are we really understanding what's happening in the food business correctly? Talk about what you observed and what you're thinking about it.
Now, again, I don't want to criticize Statistics Canada here, but I think we all know that data access has been an issue for the federal agency, and it shows. I mean, and now, of course, the lab, we're now equipped. We do have a food price portal now. We can actually tell you exactly what's going on with the price of bananas, price of ground beef every single day. Even today, I can tell you what happened with ground beef prices today in Canada. So this is something that StatsCan can do, shouldn't do, is not doing. So we're able to now evaluate how off StatsCan is with its food basket. So you see, they release the CPI, and 3 weeks later they release what we call a selected list of food products, and there's 77 different products. So it's very easy for us to take those products and compare those prices with prices we have. And so we went through the entire list. Some products we didn't have enough data to basically say, well, it's either yay or nay, or is StatsCan's data a underestimation or an overestimation? But in 34 cases, we were confident enough to say, okay, well, Statistics Canada was wrong.
And that's about, just a reminder, that's about 50%, right? You said the basket comes out about 70 some items. So that about for half of their items, they were materially incorrect. Is it what you're saying?
That's right. So, but the average error, okay, if you actually look at all 34, it's about 5.5%, which is a lot. I mean, it's a lot. But it's up or down. So this is the interesting part, I find, is that of the 34 items, 41% was an underestimation. Okay, 59% was an overestimation. So you can't really accuse the federal agency of underestimating the inflation rate now. So it's hit and miss. And my guess, Michael, because I've been looking at this data for a long time, I actually just think that because of the data that StatsCan has, it lags. It can't read the situation properly. It's about 4 to 6 months behind. And right now, I can tell you, in the month of March, in the month of April, prices are dropping. Prices are dropping. There are lots of deals out there, I can tell you. And frankly, Farm Credit Canada today released a study suggesting that prices, the food inflation rate actually could go below 2% by June or July, I think. I believe them because that's what we're seeing in our data.
In the data that we wish Stats Canada was looking at. So it's interesting because, of course, it drives a lot of inflation, drives a lot of decisions around what the interest rate is. Maybe the Bank of Canada makes a decision differently when they have different numbers around food inflation, right?
So if anything, I would say that in February, StatsCan may have overestimated food inflation this time. And we could actually see that for the month of March and April as well. Lots of fun playing with data.
No kidding. No kidding. Hey,
that's how you get when you listen to the Food Professor podcast.
That's right.
You don't have to pay tuition.
They don't call you a professor for nothing. Not a nickname. Let's talk about the U.S. Let's get back to the U.S. a little bit. Big farm bills. I mean, they've got a massive
oh my
market.
God.
Big bills. What is it? $1.4 trillion, right?
Trillion. Can you imagine $1.4 trillion? That's more than our national debt.
No, that's don't hold your breath. So that's over 10 years. Now, what's the equivalent in Canada? In terms of, well, first of all, what is the Farm Bill? What's it meant to do? What's this money for? And then help us understand the context for the Canadian context.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's important to remind folks that these bills are really about providing a vision to a very important sector in our economy. So basically, it's about funding certain things. It's about picking winners and losers, really. And the Farm Bill in the United States is massive, and it does pick winners and losers, and it really fosters a philosophy about competitiveness. And frankly, it's about incentivizing farmers as well. Okay, and it does subsidize many different sectors, including corn, for example. But they've committed to that vision. they have a vision. You may disagree with that vision, but they have a vision. In Canada, we have this framework called the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Framework, I believe, and the budget for that is $3.5 billion over 5 years.
What's
It's really, and you could think, well, we're only 10% of the U.S. population, but even that ratio doesn't work either.
Right.
I mean, there's no commitment towards agri-food in Canada if you have to think about a policy. And that's why I think, the national school food program, to me, is a step in the right direction. And so we're starting to see a vision, and I know a lot of people who are listening to us are absolutely in disagreement with that vision, but it's important to have a vision as a country. And this is not just under Prime Minister Trudeau. It was the same under Prime Minister Harper and Prime Minister Chrétien. This is not new. We've had these struggles for a long time. In agri-food, it's important to have a vision, and it's also important to focus on certain sectors, and you can't really please everyone. That's the thing. Right now, Canada is trade reliant and not necessarily trade focused, but we're doing very well trade wise. We are exporting more, but we could do even better.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's leave that part of the conversation there. Let's leave that section, the first section, and let's get to our scintillating interview with Professor Lee. But first, let's hear a few words from our presenting sponsor, who will be with us next week, by the way. Colleen will be making an appearance next week, from cattle. Ever feel like the world of ratings and reviews needed a superhero? Well, enter Cattle, the caped crusader with Canada's largest, most diverse, and daily active consumer panels. That's right, Cattle is not your average podcast sponsor. So why choose Cattle? Because Cattle excels in consumer insights from your consumer, while also blazing trails in the realm of ratings and reviews, pioneering the future landscape of user-generated content. Beyond the valuable syndicated receipt data, they stand as unparalleled collector of reviews at scale, irrespective of category or price point. A testament to their impact, partnerships with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire, and more. Visit AskCattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's AskCattle.com.
My name's Ian Lee. I'm associate professor in the Sprott School of Business, where I teach only one course. I'm a one-trick pony. I teach the strategic management course, which is the undergraduate fourth-year capstone course. I also teach an MBA. And I've been teaching that course for 38 years. I started in 1988 in the Sprott School of Business as a tenure track.
Well, you started teaching pretty much the year I graduated from Carleton, so I'm an alum. Shout out to Carleton University in the great city of Ottawa. Now, what did you always want to be a professor? Did you always want to be in business? Like, what started you down this path?
I did something very, very well. I grew up on a farm, which will be of interest to Sylvain. A real farm, by the way, in eastern Ontario, in Lanark County. A real farm with pigs and chickens and beef cattle. We didn't have dairy, but many of the people did in the area, and that was in the '60s. And I can remember vividly when I was about 10 or 11 or 12. Our nearest neighbor was a mile away, and all I wanted to do was get off the farm so badly. My dream was to go to the city, the big lights and meet lots of people my own age. And so we ended up moving to the city. My father sold the farm. And then I did something. I was overwhelmed by all the things that were one could do in the city at the age of 15, 16, 17. So I dropped out of high school. I am a high school dropout. I never did finish grade 12 or grade 13. And so I bummed around as a minimum wage unemployed. And then I realized I wasn't going anywhere in a hurry with my life. And so I enrolled part-time at Carleton at night and as a special student. And then I was lucky. I got a job as a junior management trainee at AFCO Finance. And they trained the dickens out of me, how to read balance sheets, income statements. And then I got promoted to a branch manager. And then I was recruited by the Bank of Montreal. And this is integral to this story because I was started at BMO main office branch, the fourth largest branch of the entire bank in Canada. And it was right beside West Block, Parliament Hill.
Oh, wow.
The National Press Club. And it was a very unique branch because I had 1/3 of Pierre Trudeau's cabinet ministers on my books. I had deputy ministers on my books, ambassadors on my books. Very unique branch.
So in other words, you're the former Auditor General of Canada.
I had an amazing number of the most privileged elite decision makers on my books, as did the other branch, the 4 other branches of the other 4 banks on the Spark Street Mall. And so I was having the time of my life. I was in my 20s, footloose, fancy, free, single, all that stuff. It was just wonderful. And I was getting promoted each year, and I became mortgage manager when interest rates hit 20%, by the way, and inflation went up to 14%. And then they called me in one day and said, you're doing fantastically. We're really happy with you. You've been promoted. I said, fantastic. They said, you're going to First Canadian Place in downtown Toronto. And the look on my face was just one of shock. And they said, what's wrong with that? And I said, well, I blurted out, that's a fate worse than death. I mean, imagine living in Toronto. I mean, what a horrible, horrible thought. And I believed it then, and I believe it now, and that's why I'm not in Toronto. And so they didn't fire me. They were very good. They froze you. You couldn't go further. And so I decided to go back to school. And I didn't want to do a business degree, believe it or not, because I knew, arrogant as this sounds, and I still believe it to this day, I knew way more about business than any business professor because I had been trained up the wazoo by both AFCO Finance and the Bank of Montreal. But I also knew from dealing with all these amazing people I'd been dealing with as the loan manager and mortgage manager, I knew I was an absolute ignoramus about public policy. I knew nothing about public policy. And so I applied to the School of Public Admin. It was the best thing I've ever done in my life. And it was just wonderful. It was just fantastic. They said, some professors said, look, you're really doing well. Why don't you go on for a PhD? So I applied for a PhD in public policy in the political science department because that's the only place you could do public policy at Carleton. I graduated in 88 and I got hired because I had business experience. The business school just grabbed me right away. Why these dates are significant for our conversation about food is in 1989, one of the most momentous decisions of the last 100 years, or the most momentous decision of the last 100 years happened. The Berlin Wall came down in October of 89, and then Prime Minister Mulroney, the very distinguished person that he was, announced a program of financial assistance for 2 countries, Poland and Hungary, and of which some of the money was designated for management education. So I went to 2 of my colleagues who we had recruited from Poland, 2 of these Polish mathematician types, and they come to Canada illegally because they've been in Solidarity at the time, and when Solidarity was huge, in opposition to the communist system. So anyways, it took us a long while, but we got $5 million from the government of Canada, from Joe Clark, the Minister of External Affairs, to set up the first business school. And they chose me to go over there, even though I didn't speak a word of any Slavic language. And I went over there in March, April of 1991. And why this is significant, that's when I really deeply developed my implacable hostility and contempt for centralized command and control systems where, people at the top believe that they know what's best, prime ministers that tell grocery store CEOs what to charge and what prices. And the poverty and the despair and the deprivation I saw, they hadn't transformed. The communism collapsed, but they didn't the next morning suddenly have stores filled with goods on the shelves. Sure. They went through a period in all these countries, and I started teaching I went in Russia, I taught in Bulgaria, I taught in Romania, I taught in Ukraine multiple times. And the poverty there was just stunning. And I didn't realize, I always thought that Western Europe and Canada and the US, that the rest of the world was just like us. And I realized that that's not true. And I saw it up close and personal. And I was going in 3-4 times a year in 91, 2, 3, 4, 5. I was there when Balcerowicz, the professor of finance who became the minister of finance, did the cold shock therapy and announced the immediate overnight cancellation of all food subsidies, all rent subsidies, all utility subsidies. And Poland went into this massive, we would say, I guess, a depression for about 2 years. And then they came out the other side, and then Poland just exploded and economically and just boomed and has been booming ever since. And I learned, and it wasn't just Poland, I learned this in Romania, I learned it in Ukraine, that the centrally command and control or central planning, we don't have to use the word communism. It doesn't matter. It's this idea that the people at the top have better knowledge and insight about as opposed to the market than markets.
Why does it work in China?
What happened in China, and I've been teaching in China, by the way, since 1997, every year from then until now, except for the pandemic, we stopped for 2 years. The reason why was because, first off, it didn't work until 1992. The real hero and the real father of modern China was not Mao Zedong, who almost destroyed and wrecked China. It was Deng Xiaoping, who was the genius who said we must copy and emulate the West and we must go to a decentralized economy. And he did that, the opening of China in 1991-92, that produced this incredible explosion that now President Xi is trying to roll back, which is why now their China is in decline and has so many problems. They're trying to re-centralize the system that produced this extraordinary wealth in the last 25 years. So I'm just giving you that as background because it gives you insights into what I think about and I have testified multiple times before the House of Commons Finance Committee, as Sylvain knows. And
we testified together once, yeah.
Yes. And I'm testifying next Tuesday again on before the Finance Committee. And I believe
let's get you there now. Let's get you there now. Let's hone in. Let's hone in our conversation, and let's start with an overview, as you see it, of competition in the grocery business. Ottawa, your city is a great embodiment of that. You've got lots of brands. You've got two grocery brands that were born, or at least one, Farm Boy, and you've got Costco headquarters. You've got other grocers there. It's a great Petri dish for you to talk about. And how do you see competition there and across Canada?
First off, I'm not going to suggest to you we don't need more competition. We always need more competition in every industry. I will never, ever say we have too much competition. You always need more competition because it spurs innovation. It's not a competition for the sake of innovation, of competition. The whole purpose of, and I teach this every week in my classes for 35 years, and the students are there, their eyes are as big as saucers. And I say, you've been taught for 4 years, nonsense, absolute nonsense. You've been told that firms exist to make money. I said, firms do not exist to make money. I said, and I give as an example, Sylvain, and I use it every year in the beginning class of every strategy course section. I say, I go into Loblaws and Sobeys 2-3 times a week. I said, I've been going into grocery stores for 45 years. And sometimes a clerk will come up to me and say, sir, you look a little confused, or they may not say that, but they say, can I help you? I said, I have never once said, I am here to maximize the shareholder wealth of the Loblaws shareholders. I said, who in God's name thinks like that except tenured professors in the ivory tower? Because that is not true. You go to Loblaws to buy cucumbers or to buy milk or cheese or fish or some other food to take it home and eat. Because if I don't eat, I will become sick. I have to eat to survive as a human being, like every person. Firms, and this is straight out of Schumpeter, this is straight out of Max Weber, this is straight out of Michael Porter at Harvard. Firms exist to create something of value, a product or a service. Now, if they're really good at creating and maximizing value creation in the value chain, yes, the outcome will be increase market share, increase sales, increase profitability. Think of the Apple iPhone. But that's not the purpose of the firm. That's not why firms exist. That's the outcome of successful value creation. And there's lots of deeply confused people in the government of Canada, in Industry Canada, and in the universities across Canada who do not understand that fundamental distinction. And there's students there sitting there. There's lots of students that don't even agree, I can tell. So I said to them, are you telling me that you come to Carleton University for 4 years and you spend thousands and thousands of dollars and all you want is a transcript showing 20 courses with a grade beside it? You didn't come here to learn anything. Is that true? I said, of course it's not true. That is nonsense. You come to Carleton to get an education. The outcome is a grade beside each course you took. But that's not why you came to Carleton. That's just the outcome that certifies what you learned at Carleton. You come to Carleton to learn. And the outcome is you get a grade for your courses. It's the same thing with firms. Firms exist to create something of value. It could be a bank that's offering you banking services. It can be Honda that builds a car and they want you to buy their car and not the other competitor's car. And if they're really good at it, like Steve Jobs at Apple was, well, then he can become, yes, fabulously wealthy because he created more value than the other companies. So value, profitability, and share price and market share and market capitalization are outcomes of successful value creation. So that's my overview. And to specifically and quickly to grocery stores, I do not accept the argument that there isn't competition in Canada. I completely reject that for good reasons. I'm not just asserting it. The reason why, Sylvain, is because a lot of the products, most of the products in a grocery store, and by the way, I should disclose this, I shop regularly at Walmart. Unlike most professors who are complete snobs about that, because I know that because they've told me, what on earth, you shop at Walmart? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because I am not going to pay 50% more for Javex to clean the toilet or Tilex to clean the shower than I can pay for it at Walmart. So the cleaning agents at Walmart are literally 20, 30, 40, 50% cheaper. So yes, I go regularly to Walmart. I'm very aware of Walmart. I also go to Costco. I also go to Loblaws and to Sobeys. So I'm very familiar with the various stores. And what strikes me, and I talk about this to my students, is that they're basically indistinguishable. I mean, yes, there's a Sobeys at the front of one store and another one's called Loblaws. They even organize themselves. You walk in the front and on the right-hand side, that's the produce section. The same with Walmart, the same with Sobeys. And they're selling the same products because there's a lot of concentration or oligopoly at the food processor level, Maple Leaf Foods and so forth. So I said they're selling the same stuff. And then what you get is competition, yes, between the chains, but you also get competition between the brands. And so I'm not suggesting we don't need more competition. Of course, more competition is always a good thing. But I've never bought into this premise, this thesis or assumption that we have a highly concentrated retailing when you compare it, as I always do, using evidence-based data and comparing it to other countries. We are not, it is concentrated. There is a high level of concentration, but no more so. They're in the same range as other OECD countries.
As you know, Ian, there's been a lot of discussion about the Grocer Code of Conduct.
Yes.
And I mean, clearly you're devoted to free markets. You believe in market failures. You believe in capitalism in its pure sense, I guess. And the Grocer Code of Conduct is often seen as government intervention, to be frank. However, and I want you to respond to this argument that many publicly traded private companies, independent grocers who do believe in competition are in favor of the Grocery Code of Conduct. So could you tell us more about, your overall opinion about the Code of Conduct, the concept of it, and tell us, how or why should we consider or not consider it, I guess, in Canada, in our context here?
I said I've been teaching the strategy course from the beginning, which is true. For about 5 years, from 89 or 90 till about 1995, I taught one course a year, which was a lot of fun. It was sort of a spin-off or a derivative, if you will. And it was called Business Government Relations in Canada. And I had a lot of fun, and I brought in people from the associations. And because Ottawa is the capital, and there's over 600 associations, the Canadian Bankers Association, the Canadian, Oil and Gas Association, the pipelines. We know all these associations. And so I brought them in because they had a point of view, and that was the way I'd structured the course. To your question, I have never been opposed to self-regulation, to industries saying, you know what, we need our own code of conduct in banking, or we need it in pipelines, or we need it in wherever. I've never been opposed to the idea of self-regulation. And by the way, when you said, of course I believe in the market economies, for a very good reason, because the most successful countries in the world with the highest standard of living are the market economies. And the non-market economies have, and one only has to look at the World Bank data by country. They organize all the countries of the world, as you know, into high income, middle income, and low income. And the low income countries, the poorest countries in the world who are desperately poor, are the ones that are farthest away from a market economy. So my view about this is not ideological, as you may have suggested or thought. It is grounded in the results. Decentralized market economies produce the highest standard of living in the world. Milton Friedman won a Nobel Prize for his massive study showing that the wealthiest countries are only decentralized market economies in the world. So that's the reason why I've said that. But I don't want to leave you or your listeners with the idea I'm some kind of a slobbering neo-Trumpian. I think Trump is a disgrace. He's a rapist. He should not be. So, okay, let's get that off the table. But more to the point, I am from a family of public servants. My late father was 42 years in the government of Canada. My partner was 35 years until she retired with the government of Canada. My two daughters-in-law are in the government of Canada. I'm a public servant as a professor. This is not an ideological public servants are lazy bums. That's not true. I've never said that. I do not believe that. What I've said, to get to the code of conduct in 1 second, is that the role of government is very, very, very important. They are the referee of the football game. They're the referees that wear the black and white stripes. But they should never, ever tell Patrick Mahomes when to throw the ball on the football game or to whom to throw the ball to. Oh, throw it to Kelsey. Can you imagine a referee standing there in the game, refereeing them and telling the players how to play the game of football? That is preposterous nonsense. The role of government is to referee the game. You have a level playing field, hopefully, called the rules of the game, because people cheat. Corporations, I'm not a naive person. Corporations cheat all the time, just like football players cheat. Hockey players cheat. They grab face masks, they trip, they spear, they poke. They do all kinds of bad things. And the role of the referees is to penalize them when they cheat and to call them out. But it is not to tell them how to run the football game or the hockey game or the soccer game or the baseball game. So to the code of conduct, yes, indeed, if the industry decides we need one, by all means. But the idea that the public servants at 235 Queen Street in downtown Ottawa, where Industry Canada, or whatever it's now called, IESE, I think is the acronym, that they have superior knowledge to the people that run airlines or run grocery stores or run banks is preposterous nonsense. It is the conceit of the central planners. And Hayek also was a Nobel laureate, by the way.
The proposal right now, as it stands, it would be a government-coordinated, industry-led grocer code of conduct. Is that something that you would be comfortable with?
No, I'm completely opposed. And Sylvain, let me use this as my evidence so people, again, don't say, oh, that's just ideology of Ian Lee. Okay, I study these countries. I've been to Argentina. I've been using it in my classes for 35 years. In 1918, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world on a per-person basis, wealthier than Canada per person. So we're not playing games with sizes of GDPs. Today, they've collapsed. We're 60,000 GDP per person. They're about 10,000.
More than once, actually.
Yes, more than. And so what happened was under Peronisme, they did many of the things we're doing, but they did it much more excessively. Command and control, government dirigisme, choosing which companies will get subsidized, picking winners and losers, keeping out foreign competition. They just did it much more aggressively and much more successfully. They destroyed the Argentine economy. And so here's my evidence. The most successful dynamic country on the planet Earth since 1880, when it surpassed the United Kingdom, is right next door, called the United States of America. Can anybody, I put this out as a thought experiment in media, can anybody even imagine President Obama or President Biden? Let's not use Republicans. Let's use Democratic presidents. Lyndon Johnson, Bill Clinton, saying, I'm going to call in the grocery CEOs and tell them to change their prices. I've never heard of anything so preposterous. The Americans would laugh themselves silly. They would think that this is the silliest thing of all.
Now, what the Americans, now let's take a pause there. So I wanted to widen or open the aperture to talk about the difference between regulation and free market principles. So as you would likely know, Justice Department under the Biden government is suing Kroger and Albertsons to stop the merger. They don't think it's in the best interests of competition
in America,
and they don't.
And I support that too, by the way. And I support it too.
So there is this difference between objective and subjective regulation is very interesting, I'm sure, to you as well, because occasionally, and you know this very well, in the U.S., the breakup of the Baby Bells, the forcing of Microsoft to open up their browser, this created tremendous growth in the economy. So how do you think about those two things, the role of government and what they, setting the market? Talk about that.
If I can gently criticize you, if I can. When I was doing my I was doing my PhD in 84 to 88, and it was an incredible period. Not because I was there; it was an incredible period because this was the foment. The intellectual foment was astonishing. Margaret Thatcher was in power and privatizing anything that walked. Mulroney was privatizing like crazy, and the Economic Council of Canada had this amazing so-called reference on regulation where they commissioned over 200 papers on various aspects of regulation, deregulation, privatization, etc. And there were some astonishingly outstanding papers published, some authored by Carleton, some by U of T, from Queen's, some from the States. And they made this very important distinction between economic regulation or direct regulation versus indirect regulation. Having a framework called a Competition Act that does not allow an industry to become too concentrated, there was a consensus that that's perfectly legitimate because you're not picking winners and losers. You're saying the industry must not become concentrated. It's a generic statement. You're not telling an individual firm or group of firms how to play the football game. You're not telling them where to put their production plant or what products to produce. That's the distinction between. So I have no problem whatsoever. In fact, my criticism of the Competition Bureau, and I sat beside him in the last time I was there, was they were decrying the concentration of firms in Canada. And I said, who the hell authorized them for the last 15 years? It was the Competition Bureau. Yeah. Come on, look in the mirror, my friend. Yeah. Okay. In other words, if we believe it's to, and I have no problem with saying, even going so far as to say, an industry will set a benchmark, shall not be more than 50% concentration ratio, or just choose your number, some number. I have no problem with that. But that's not the same thing as a government saying, we're going to tell you how to conduct and run your value chain. We're going to trump the price discovery system. The genius of capitalism is not profit maximization like a lot of people who do not understand markets, including people who live in capitalist countries. That's not the driving force of capitalism. Schumpeter said that, by the way. He said this 70, 80 years ago. It's innovation is at the core. And the second thing is price discovery, because that's where you find out in the marketplace if your innovation was a good idea or a bad idea, because then the market decides if they're going to buy your products produced by that innovation. And so those are the two key aspects of the market economy: is innovation, which arrives from contested markets because there's entry and exit into the market. And then secondly, price discovery. The government repeatedly in our country is trying to modify, if not outright suspend, price discovery. And they're even doing that with innovation, because they're making the decision, we want a battery plant and we're going to pay $15 billion. And that should not be decided by government. That should be decided by private competitive markets. By the way, my views are basically indistinguishable from Andrew Coyne and from David Dodge on these issues. So I'm not some far right-wing kook. This is the business liberal thinking.
You don't believe that at all. But I have one last question for you, Ian, because as you know, I work with Minister Champagne. We meet on a regular basis on this issue of food price stabilization. If you were Minister Champagne today, the Minister of Innovation, hearing all of the cries and complaints coming from Canadians, because Canadians are really upset right now, what would you do?
I understand your question, because, of course, politicians do have to live in the real world. They have to deal with the fact that there are people out there who are voters. And that's the reality of a democratic. We not only have decentralized markets, we have a decentralized political system. And that's what Friedman said was the genius of the success of Western countries. So it's decentralized, meaning it's not top-down command and control dictatorships like in China or Russia, but it is decentralized democratic campaigns, elections, and then it's decentralized markets. But to your question, I understand what you're saying, but I've testified, as you know, multiple times on this. And I said, you cannot build policy based on fraud or lies. And as you know, I've said it multiple times, it is deceitful and dishonest of any politician to come out and talk about the excess profits in this industry when the net profit margin is running at 3.5%. And I've got the StatsCan data. People cannot deny this. I have the audited financial statements going back every year for 5 years for the big three. And unless somebody wants to start arguing that all the accounting firms that have done all the audited statements are providing fraudulent audits, and I don't believe that. That's a conspiracy theory.
That would be a much greater problem.
We would have a much greater problem. So we've got to start with the data. I always tell the students, start with the data, then you can go to strategy and policy. But you got to start with the data, and you just have to get out there and say, as I'm doing every time, and yeah, I get hate mail. That's okay. I write them back. I send them back graphs of the data from StatsCan, by the way. And then I never hear from them again. And you got to start with truth to power. That doesn't mean you throw up your hands and do nothing. You can say, we're going to reform the Competition Bureau to give it more teeth, to prevent mergers and acquisitions that constantly drive up the concentration ratio. That is the way to deal with it. It's not going to solve the problem overnight, but then neither are there solutions of saying we're going to have a grocery code of conduct. Anyone who thinks that that's going to produce nirvana on grocery store pricing, it's nonsense. We know that the prices are coming down. I've been talking about interest rates in the media because I lived through 79, 80 when the interest rates went from 4 to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 to 20, not 5, 20. I lived through it. It wasn't theory. It was the real world. And by God, did they ever kill inflation? They also produced the worst and deepest recession since the Great Depression of the 30s. And we went through a horrible recession. Unbelievable. But then we murdered inflation for a third of a century until we let the genie back out of the bottle in the last 3 or 4 years because of the pandemic. I won't get into that. But they could be acting instead of reactively. They can start by speaking truth to power on this and saying, look, the grocery store retailing is not making excessive profits. Their net profit margin is running 3.5%. And that's on the record from StatsCan and the audits. But that doesn't mean you do nothing. It means you do other things. And you can do things like reducing the barriers to entry, because we have, and this is where I'm going to jump very quickly to the Bank of Canada's speech, which I applauded. We have a culture of protectionism in this country, and it is pernicious, and it's becoming much worse. And we should be going in the opposite direction, where we're opening up the doors so that there is competition in banking, there is more competition in groceries, that Verizon can come into Canada, or the French telecom system, Orange, can come into Canada. We need to open the doors. We have LCBO monopolies, which is outrageous. The beer store, it's a monopoly. It's outrageous. We have interprovincial barriers that the Senate committee said is costing 5 to 7% of GDP. We've got to that's what we need. The government should be doing. I don't think it will, by the way, but that's what they should be doing, is saying we're going to work assiduously to open markets up so that they're, to use Schumpeter's famous phrase, that they're contestable. And when you have contestability, you then have innovation. And when you have innovation, it drives down prices to lower levels. That's the way to go, and not this pretend game of a code of conduct and calling in grocery CEOs and lecturing them and pretending that you're President Xi or President Putin.
This has been, I wish you would have brought a little more energy to the conversation, or a little more, perhaps a little more gumption. But
I promise you, I talk like this in my classes too, and I have very good teaching evaluations. Some professor said to me, I'm much younger, and when are you going to retire? And I have the average for the Sprott School, and I'm much higher than the average. And I said, when my teaching evaluations are lower than you young people, that's when I'm going to retire.
When I'm 71, I hope I will have half of your energy, which is great. No, I seriously, it was just wonderful to listen to you on this podcast.
Yeah, listen, it was fantastic. Thanks for joining Sylvain and I here on the Food Professor podcast. We enjoyed the conversation, very stirring, and I think adds a lot of value. So thanks again. Continued success in everything you do, and keep doing what you do at Carleton University and in front of our political leaders, and having and fostering a great discussion is what we're all about. So once again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about these issues, because they're not being talked about nationally, and so this is very important.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm practically out of breath even just listening to that again. But boy, I learned a lot, and I wish I was one of his students, because I think it's an invigorating discussion that needs to be had. So yeah, that was our conversation with Ian. Now, a correction from last episode. I talked about how Amazon was walking away from their just walk out technology in grocery stores, which is still the case. But the idea that the tech was powered somehow by 1,000 folks in India watching monitors was disavowed by Amazon in an interview with a friend of mine, the top analyst, Sucharita Kadali from Forrester. So I take her word on that. So for those, it's funny. It was a funny piece of news, but Amazon said, we don't even know where that came from. There's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So anyway, wanted to make that correction. Couple last things. I've been thinking about the wine glut around the world. I was been reading in Australia, they're ripping out vines. They just go way too much wine. And now I was reading this report out of California that they've just got massive amounts of wine. I mean, there's a brokerage that called the Turrentine Brokerage, trying to sell 19 million gallons statewide at the end of the second quarter last year. And this year it's 24 million, just because they're not selling enough. They're older wine. So we're really starting to see the changes of consumption patterns around wine and beer really kick in, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are noticing, and yeah, absolutely. And it's going to impact strategies all over the world, including, our beautiful wine industry in Ontario. Actually, I was meeting with grape growers last week in Niagara. I was meeting them virtually, but I didn't have some great news for them because, as you noted, I mean, consumer behavior is actually shifting everywhere, and there's more awareness around health, and people are a bit more careful. I think they're still enjoying wine; they're just not drinking as much.
Yeah, and there's other categories. Ready to drink beverages are pretty big, and so the wine industry's still a huge and important industry, but people are just drinking less wine. So we'll keep a close eye on that, because it's just interesting to see the dynamics of these different industries from craft beer to wine to cannabis. We're going to talk about cannabis next week, because we're kind of up on 420, and we did some custom research with our friends from cattle we're going to hear about. I wanted to end, we talked a little bit about at the beginning, robots at the RC show. There's this great article in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if you saw it, but the meat packing robots they show there in Smithfield. So the largest U.S. pork producer, Smithfield, is now rolling out automated rib pullers. And you watch this video, I'll put a link in, and it leaves less meat on the bone. It's just relentless. And, that's a tough job, right? It's hard to, the spokesman says we're allowing workers to be reassigned. They've got to say that. I guess they're paid to say that. The reality is we can't find the people, and we're going to need less people, but nobody wants those jobs. But you got to say, other people are going to do other things. So they had 35,000 people in the U.S. They plan to reassign 500 people a year. I don't know if they're going to reassign. They can't find them anyway. So, it can turn out 20 to 30% more chicken nugget strips and wings with 250 fewer people. So, listen, I think what we're starting to see, you've been calling for this since the beginning of this podcast and even longer, is there's no way to keep these plants going without tremendous investment in innovation, and we're seeing it in the U.S. market, and we're seeing that coming out in their productivity numbers, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's critical, and frankly, it's becoming dangerous, really, for all of us. And so you want to upgrade the system as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So I don't know what's going to take. I mean, the Listeria crisis back in 2008. With Menthol, I thought it was going to be the wake up call, and then after that, of course, COVID in 2020, we saw a lot of plants being impacted by COVID, and a lot of people were thinking about upgrading a lot of these plants, and nothing really happened. Some Band-Aid solutions were brought forward, and that's about it. And I don't think it's going to be enough.
Well, Smithfield, just to close on that, say they're going to put $1.3 billion into just automation of their operations, from processing to packaging.
Yeah.
And
I mean, just today in Montreal, I was visiting I'm not going to tell you which company, but that's exactly their dilemma. They need to remain competitive with competitive price points at retail. It's a B2C model.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to make sure that their products remain competitive. So what are they doing? They're reinvesting in their facilities. They have 5 facilities. They're reinvesting to actually increase yields and reduce costs. And that's the game. And that's going to impact the entire system. I mean, just looking at what's going on retail, that pressure is going to go up the food chain, and it is impacting manufacturing for sure.
Well, and so they're not calling for more temporary foreign workers to work in the meat plants. They're investing in technology, and I think we got to pay close attention to that, because I think this has tremendous impact on the productivity of our nation.
Yeah.
And I've heard many leaders say their fellow business people are not investing enough in this country, and we're starting to see that kind of delta open up. And so anyway, this Wall Street Journal article caught my attention because I know you've been very passionate about it for many years. And anyway. All right. Well, listen, it was a busy episode. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about next week. Like I said, we're going to have Colleen from Cattle pop in with some custom research. We wanted to understand what's happening in the consumable market. We're celebrating 420 and legal cannabis. So we wanted to understand that, just to time that in for the week. So she'll be our pop-in guest, but we also have another guest next week, guest upon guest upon guest, to look forward to. Lots of super interesting people lined up. And then speaking of Montreal, you and I will be at Cial. We'll be the official podcast of Cial in Montreal.
That's right.
In mid-May. So really looking forward to that. So I was talking about that actually on the RC floor, ran into our friend Joanne MacArthur, who's will see us there. She's judge and involved and all that stuff. And she's very into the Cial show. So anyway, and you'll be on stage. I'm moderating a session on innovation in the food business, which will be wonderful. Tell everybody a bit more about that. So run, don't walk. Get your tickets for Cial, and stop by our big fishbowl of a podcast studio and say hi. Well, listen.
Yes.
You're headed back home from Montreal, and thank you for making the time, squeezing it in, because you're on the move all the time. So thanks for squeezing this in. And
thank you for accommodating my schedule. Jeez.
Yeah. Hey. No, there's no I in team. There you go. There you go. And speaking of I am Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, advisor, podcaster, media guy, I guess. And you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois, live from Montreal.
Live from Montreal, the great city of Montreal, where once again we'll be very soon, and we'll be together. That's the next time you and I will be together in the same place. So super looking forward to that. So until then, everybody, be safe. Sylvain, have a safe drive home, or flight home, I should say. And we'll talk to everybody next week.
Take care.